Okay, well, money. On 18th January 2026, we saw an emergency meeting in Brussels when the EU ambassador held an emergency meeting over Greenland. Well, it's important we should try to understand that there's a regime debate or a retaliation between the EU and US. It's important President Donald Trump, well, is fighting hard to get Greenland. And in this meeting, nothing much was conquered in one or the other. However, there's a second meeting coming 22nd January. That's likely to gonna be having all the EU members available to see what could be the end goal. However, factors were indicated in this meeting show some real big moves that are likely to be take place. We are not sure how they're likely to be taking such kind of moves or kind of retaliation would really take place, because in this incident, well, a few factors were spoken in actual sense, or a few things were taken down, or you do not. We should try to understand that in this meeting there was a few factors that were written down in simple terms. Okay, in this meeting, a few factors were indicated in simple terms, and these were actual factors actually for Europe. In simple terms, they showed unified support for Denmark and Greenland. That means they showed their position that they are going to be supporting Greenland. They are not going to be supporting that Trump move to be conquering Greenland. They also went ahead and condemned the tariff threats that Trump tried to implement over countries like Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, UK, Netherlands, and Finland. And they stated saying that such threats or such tariffs are not really recognizable, are not really hyped up, are not really visible for them in their eye of view in simple terms. The next thing that was seen in this meeting was to make sure that Trump recognizes that the shared transatlantic interest in the Arctic. So in simple terms, he should Arctic and show less interest, maybe back off, which I believe cannot be likely to be happening. The real factor that made this meeting to be booming news in simple terms is the retaliation. Well, EU likely or promises or is likely to be making a retaliation of over 93 billions in simple terms in assets that are likely to be tariffed in simple terms, which could restrict the US from accessing the EU markets, investments, and services. And that's where this point of the video begins. If you try to understand that, can EU make such a move in order to save its interest in Greenland, or in order to recognize Denmark and Greenland? Because we all understand that the biggest exports, almost 75% of its exports, looking at the US in simple terms, and most of its imports are coming from the US in simple terms. Does this indicate the end of NATO in one or the other? Does this indicate, because through this kind of pulling ropes left to right and left and right and center, it means that does this mean that we are reaching an end of seeing the end of NATO one or the other? Because we saw Trump also announcing the border of peace, and on this border of peace he invited countries like you would call Russia. And Russia today is the guy why Europe is fighting hard to have US has an alliance over Russia. I imagine if Russia allies itself with Europe in the case of Greenland, I mean, just imagine if you're a lady and you ask yourself, who should I get married to? Is it Trump or Putin? Because that's the case of Europe today. One of the major factors why Europe is facing such a condition today, well, I would say Europe thrown back, or they made a lagging in their military command. Like, they failed out to build up. I'm not saying that they're not militarily strong, but according to the way you see countries like America, Russia, and China, these are countries that are likely to be way far in terms of military. And one of the main reasons why Europe is always likely to be to have the US to be has an ally is because of the hegemon command that it interacts around the world in simple terms. such a character or such a behavior means one or two things that I believe this is a big lesson for Europe in one or the other, because over depending on someone that he will always be there when you need them, maybe sometimes people do change one or the other. Because I believe and I expect in the next 10 years, Europe is going to start trying to stand on its own feet in one or the other to introduce what we all try to understand as becoming military strong, like investing more into its military grading one or the other. We are going to see a relationship between the EU and US maybe degrading one or the other, because I believe this relationship can go down and go up one or the other. However, this could be a big lesson for EU countries, because the overdependence on such countries like the US as an ally, when you know these guys are supremacy more than you, they have better, they are well equipped in weapons, and when you need them one or the other, they can maybe turn their backs on you. That's kind of a bigger lesson for the EU, and that's something that should be, I would highly recommend to take into consideration one or the other, to man up in one or the other, or to wake up. That's like a big wake-up call for the EU one or the other, because we all believe that, and also diversify in their trading markets in one or the other. These behaviors of maybe I won't trade with China, China is a threat. When the US tells you shouldn't trade with China, you also stop. This is among the biggest challenges why the EU also fears facing the US in this kind of a scenario, one or the other, because you also try to understand that such a scenario means one or two things. It means that the EU is in a condition that we try to understand has something that's it's like trying to fight your master. I'm not saying it's their master, but that's how it looks like, one or the other. Someone you depend on, someone who you know that puts food on the table, and you're trying to fight him one or the other. That's kind of bizarre. Quote me, I'm just giving an example. I'm not saying that the US is the master of the Europe. No. But just a simple example. That shows that the more you become dependent on someone, you may find yourself when he goes to war with you, you have nothing to say. Most of the time, you're gonna find yourself when you're finding yourself obeying when you're out of options over either when you're just left to obey otherwise. And that's the same situation with the EU. Regardless how the EU could stand up and fight for you, Europe one or the other, they all know the US is strong, military is strong. However, also the US has a lot to lose in one or the other, because I believe there won't be any real war between these two. Otherwise, the future can tell from one or the other, because they're all interdependent one another. And US breaking up the relationship with the EU, that's a big move actually, because it will be keeping the EU looking to other countries like we saw Canada. Canada today almost is a partner with China in the trading terms. They removed the 100% tariff to almost a 6.5% tariff on China EVs. Such moves when you start seeing Western countries diversifying markets to China. Actually, in this kind of war of Greenland and the EU, Greenland, the EU, and the US, it has played a big role for China. Has another factor that maybe at times not everything but zero is bad in the other. We should also try to understand that such a move indicates that the US is kind of digging a hole for yourself one or the other, because it's losing what I would call like military command in the rest of the world. Because if you also start attacking allies one or the other in such a way, who's going to be your friend one or the other? It shows terms of a dictator one or the other, because it's acting like an actual dictator. We saw it in Venezuela, and EU was like, yeah, that's a bad guy, ABCD. And when Trump looked at Greenland, things turned around one or the other. But in actual sense, you try to understand that on 22nd January, that's when we are hoping to see another EU meeting and to see what's likely to be coming out. Either the retaliation will be conducted or no. I have less hopes for the retaliation, because I hope for the EU and the Trump administration to have a fair talks, because I believe they still need their relationship in the war against Russia and Ukraine. Because regardless how their relationship is kind of sinking at this hour, I feel like they need one another, mostly in terms of Ukraine and Russia. Otherwise, thank you for watching. See you in the next one.